When was the last time a game enamored you? When a game not only provided an excellent experience, but changed how you viewed the medium of video games as a whole. Sure, plenty of games that are expertly crafted and fun come out nowadays, but that's not what I'm talking about. What's the last game that left you thinking about it months, even years after you played it? The last game to do that for me was Sucker Punch Productions' Ghost of Tsushima. Released in 2020 as the final flagship PlayStation 4 title, this game not only delivered the ultimate samurai power fantasy that people have been waiting for ages, but also got its players to think about the meaning of war, family, and most of all, honor. Sure, samurai games existed long before Sucker Punch ever took their swing at it, but none of them did so in a way that truly felt authentic to its setting, and was fully realized on this level. As such, the game went on to become one of the 10 best-selling video games on the PS4, right alongside Marvel's Spider-Man, God of War 2018, and Uncharted 4: Thief's End. That is incredible for a new franchise, even one in the PlayStation brand. As such, it would go on to be ported to the PS5 and PC, and even have a sequel developed called Ghost of Tsushima, and I can't wait to play it. Yet the question remains, what is it about this game that makes it stand right alongside God of War, Uncharted, and The Last of Us? How much respect did the developers have for the real events this game's story is based on? And most importantly, is it worthy of being called a masterpiece by many? My name is Aaron the Wolf, and this is why Ghost of Tsushima is my favorite PlayStation game. Ghost of Tsushima was first unveiled to the public at PlayStation's Paris Games Week in 2017. Later on, an 8-minute gameplay trailer was shown at E3 2018, which is where most people, including myself, got to see firsthand what the game was like, and I was immediately sold on it. Beyond just being a stellar-looking game from a visual fidelity standpoint, the sheer attention to detail to the feudal Japan era, as well as the simple but incredibly clean-looking gameplay, was enough to sell me on the game completely. Not to mention, I had previous experience with Sucker Punch's work with the Sly Cooper trilogy, which I loved. So even if I didn't have a PS4 at the time, I would have gotten one just to play this game. The most interesting thing about the game's direction is that Sucker Punch is an American game studio, and they were making a game in a Japanese setting. Sure, the actors were mostly Japanese which were speaking English, but the creative team consisted of American developers. The directors consisted of game director Nate Fox and creative and art director Jason Connell. Nate Fox, being a longtime veteran of Sucker Punch, had previously directed the Sly Cooper trilogy and the Infamous trilogy. Side note, I would absolutely love to talk about both of these franchises on the channel, but that's for another day. Jason Connell, albeit a newer developer for Sucker Punch, had been part of the art department for Infamous Second Son. Now, even though they had some talented people in charge of the game, Sucker Punch knew it wasn't going to be enough to do the game justice. As such, they worked with Sony Computer Entertainment Japan Studio to discuss details about feudal Japan, and even had 10 members of Sucker Punch fly out to the island of Tsushima for a tour with a historian by their side to make sure they knew as many details as they could. But the biggest inspiration for why Fox and Connell wanted to make this game was, of course, the filmography of famed director Akira Kurosawa. Sucker Punch wanted to move away from the more superhero-based gameplay of Infamous. Fox and Connell believed that a game focused on sword-based combat would be the perfect direction to go, and Kurosawa films were known for their sword fights, so it just made sense. The game even has a mode that puts it in black and white with Japanese dialogue. If you'd like to get into Kurosawa's films yourself, I'd recommend starting with Rashomon because of its engaging narrative. After that, Seven Samurai. That being said, not everything about Ghost of Tsushima's presentation is historically accurate. To set the stage, the game takes place in the year 1247 during the first Mongol invasion of Japan. The game features the protagonist Jin Sakai writing haikus, and while they technically existed in 1274, they wouldn't be in the form we know them today until the 17th century. Not to mention, Jin's armor and sword are based more on their respective designs of the Sengoku period, since that's what most people imagine when they think of ancient samurai. So no, the game is not 100% historically accurate to the time, but it's still faithful in the most important ways. The kanji symbols present in every mission's title card are in fact from feudal Japan's time. As such, Ghost of Tsushima is a piece of historical fiction, in the same vein as Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty, taking place in real points in time, but the characters and stories are crafted specifically for the games. So why am I telling you all this? Well, just because a piece of media isn't entirely accurate to the source, that doesn't make it a lesser form of entertainment. My favorite film of all time, Prince of Egypt, isn't entirely accurate to the Book of Exodus, but it doesn't change the fact that it's one of the best directed animated films ever made, in my opinion anyway. The same applies to Ghost of Tsushima. It may not be completely accurate to its setting, yet it's still one of PlayStation's best games in years. And now I think it's time to truly talk about the game itself. To answer the question, how did Sucker Punch tell a powerful story set during the Mongolian invasion of Japan? Right off the bat, I want to focus on the story and characters last, since I believe them to be the most important reason as to why this game is truly phenomenal. For now, let's just focus on how Ghost of Tsushima gives its players the ultimate samurai power fantasy. To give some context, Jin Sakai starts as a loyal samurai to the shogun, fighting alongside his uncle Lord Shimura, and as the game progresses, Jin starts to see the world and the means of fighting the Mongol invasion in an entirely different light. It's important to mention this, as the gameplay reflects how Jin's methods of fighting go from confrontational and honorable to a more stealth-based fight from the shadows approach. At the start, you have the sword combat. The combat itself is simple in the grand scheme of action games, but what keeps it fun to play is the different challenges the player will face throughout the game. You have standard light and heavy attacks, as well as the parry mechanics. Eventually, you can upgrade the parry mechanics so that if you manage to time the parry just right, the enemy will be wide open for a devastating sword slice, which usually kills them. This is not only necessary to master for the many enemy encounters and duels you come across in the game, but it's incredibly satisfying to pull off, especially if you're on low health and need to clutch it out to survive. Along the way, you can also learn different sword techniques like the Heavenly Strike, which takes some of your resolve for a super fast sword slice that you can even combo into. Speaking of resolve, that is not only how you perform special sword techniques, but also how you heal. As long as you have one full spear of resolve, you'll be able to heal simply by pressing down on the D-pad. You can also upgrade this so that if you're on the ground and about to be killed, you can spend 2 spears of resolve to get back up. The trade-off is that to get resolve, you need to successfully land sword hits and get kills to fill it back up. So if you want to be able to heal or use sword techniques, you need to be able to perform the combat well, which makes for a fun, challenging, and fair experience all around. On top of that, you also unlock different stances for countering different weapon types. Stone stance for swords, water stance for shields, wind stance for spears, and moon stance for brutes. At first, it's pretty simple switching stances for one type of enemy, which can be seen as boring. However, that all changes when they start throwing multiple enemy types at you at once. Not only do you have to know when to parry and dodge attacks, but you also have to switch between different stances on the fly, since fighting a certain type of enemy with a different stance will cause them to be more difficult to fight. Oh yeah, there's also one more stance to unlock during the battle for Yarikawa: Ghost Stance. And I think I'll let the footage speak for itself.
Invaders! Look at your general! Run! This will be your fate!
Using Ghost Stance mid-fight is a great way to turn the tides in your favor. However, the catch is that you have to kill a certain number of enemies without getting hit to use it. Once again, this incentivizes you to learn and master the game mechanics to truly feel like the Ghost. All of this sounds like a lot to manage at once, and it is, so it may lead you to think that it's incredibly hard to survive these encounters. Fortunately, Sucker Punch had the brilliant idea to design the flow of combat similarly to Kurosawa films like Seven Samurai. Many enemies will come towards you, but only one will attack at a time, similar to how Nintendo designed the combat of Ocarina of Time way back in the day. This way, the movements of the enemy are much easier to read so that even less experienced players can still hold their own. This also means the game does not have a traditional lock-on feature like The Legend of Zelda or the modern God of War games. Not only would a lock-on system like that not work with the camera system, but it would also make it harder to gauge which enemy is going to attack you and when. Instead, the camera is given a wider angle, and simply pressing the control stick in the direction of the enemy you want to engage with will shift Jin's focus towards them. It's intelligent game design like this that keeps a tough game fun and not frustrating. Going back to Kurosawa influences, of course, this game gives you the option of performing standoffs with quick draws, because it wouldn't be a samurai power fantasy without them. And all of this isn't even talking about the other side of the gameplay yet. After Jin fails to rescue his uncle from the leader of the Mongols, Khotun Khan, he realizes that the direct and honorable way of the samurai isn't going to be enough to save Tsushima. Instead, he takes the approach of his new ally, Yuna, which focuses more on stealth kills and moving through the shadows like a ghost. Your stealth kills initially start slow and loud, showing Jin's inexperience with this method of killing. As the game progresses and you unlock more upgrades for your weapons, his assassinations becomes not just quicker, but more versatile. Eventually, you'll take a page from Assassin's Creed and jump off advantage points to kill enemies from above, which can even be upgraded to chain kill up to 3 enemies at a time. There's also a bunch of other options for stealth and combat, like the bow and arrow. It's pretty standard as far as action games are concerned, but you can also use it to stealth kill enemies, provided they aren't wearing helmets, explosive arrows that can take on a group of enemies or set off other explosives, and fire arrows which can be used to set planes of grass on fire, which is very helpful for dealing with larger groups of enemies. Then there's the ghost tools for whenever you need an extra edge to survive enemy encounters. Kunais to break an enemy's guard, black powder bombs for crowd control, sticky bombs that serve as a great way to get enemies off of you, darts that instantly poison enemies for a more discreet approach, and chimes that can lure an enemy into a certain position. The sheer amount of tools at your disposal should give you plenty of options for enemy engagement. This also helps put you in the shoes of Jin as he decides how to deal with opposing forces in his way. Do you want to be direct and start an encounter with a standoff? Or would you rather be discreet and pick off enemies one by one? Aside from a few missions that require it to be one way or another, the choice is up to you. The best part about all this though, is that the two approaches aren't isolated from one another. Stealth options can also be used in direct combat as well. If there's an enemy that has their back turned to you in combat and you sneak up on them, you can still perform an assassination and even chain assassinations. Everything was thought of with the combat in this game, making for seemingly endless possibilities for combat engagement. It's one of the most fun and rewarding gameplay loops I've seen in a PlayStation title in a long while. The combat isn't the only reason the game works so well. There's also the island of Tsushima itself. First, to point the obvious, look. Just look at how beautiful this game is. What you're seeing is the PS5 version of the game, which upgrades the visuals to 4K 60 FPS. But even on base PS4, the game still looks incredible. The leaves falling from the trees, the way the wind affects plants and loose pieces of clothing, to even the detail of Jin's clothes getting muddy as he rolls around on the ground and can even wash off select parts of it in rivers. That is a level of polish I can admire. The fact that it looks as good as it does, and yet the load times are some of the shortest of this kind of game, even on base PS4, shows you just how well Sucker Punch optimized this game's performance. Of course, there's more to a game's world than just how pretty and detailed it is. Navigation is also simple and clean to use. Most open world games use some sort of compass to give players an indication of where the objectives are, but Ghost of Tsushima has one of the most brilliant contextual compasses I've ever seen in a game. Instead of using a non-diegetic compass, the wind blows in the direction of your current objective. What makes this even better is that Jin's childhood caretaker, Yuriko, says,
"Your father is the wind at your back."
It's as if at this moment when Jin asks his father what to do to save Lord Shimura, his father is telling him where to go. Simply genius. It's admittedly a small aspect of the game, but the fact they came up with something this simple yet fantastic shows you just how much detail was put into this game. In terms of what to do in the world itself, Ghost of Tsushima has more than enough substantial content for an open world game. We have traditional things like side quests, whether they be assisting some of the many side characters or common villagers, as well as mythic tales that once completed will either give you a new armor set or a new sword technique for combat. Speaking of armor sets, Ghost of Tsushima also excels in incorporating different armor into the game. Most games of this caliber feature armor sets with very minimal differences. God of War 2018 and Ragnarok are both games that get this system wrong in my opinion. Those games feature armor where the difference in player stats is virtually non-existent, and only the armor pieces that increase your overall level actually have an impact on improving your stats. Armor in Ghost of Tsushima doesn't work like that. Instead, the armor focuses more on specific gameplay purposes that make each one worth using outside of just making numbers go up. Some armor sets let you kill more enemies during a standoff, while others allow you to be harder to detect during stealth. There's a legitimate reason to use all the armor sets in the game, even if theoretically you could live with just wearing one particular set. There are other ways that Tsushima has for you to grow even stronger. Throughout the world, you can find many different activities that will give you gameplay benefits the more you do them. These include bamboo stands, where you can cut through bamboo to increase your maximum resolve, different shrines to find, whether they be from climbing a mountain or following a friendly fox to unlock more emblem slots to either give you minor or major buffs, resting places to write haikus that'll give you a different headband for each one you complete, and even hot springs that, outside of giving us fan service, both allow Jin to reflect on the events of the story and slightly increase your maximum health for every different hot spring you visit. One of my favorite aspects about the world of Tsushima is how the enemy forces evolve as the story progresses and Jin's fighting tactics change. Initially, you'll start with fighting bandits and Mongol warriors, but after Jin's childhood friend Ryuzo betrays him for his men, you'll begin to encounter Straw Hat warriors in the wild with unique methods of attacking you. Once Jin starts to fully embrace the ghost, during combat, some enemies will become frightened of you and even run away. This is also where you can kill any enemies flailing on the ground terrified. Yet another option in your ever-growing toolkit for combat. This is what I mean about how the world evolves throughout the story. It feels natural and not video gamey. As your legend grows, different enemies will show up and react to you accordingly. Okay, now for some smaller aspects that aren't big enough for their own sections. The soundtrack, composed by Island Ishikari and Shigeru Umebayashi, is expertly crafted, just like everything else in the game. In an interview with Den of Greek, Island talked about his approach towards the music, saying, "What really got me is that Jin is in crisis the whole time. He's emotional. He's having to go against everything he's been taught, everything in his moral code, in order to save the people that he loves." That is a very intense and rich place to come into to explore any kind of emotion at all whatsoever. I thought, I can write something really powerful from that place. Instead of simply making the music sound like that of a Kurosawa film, he researched Japanese Shomyo Buddhist music to craft a score that sounded authentic to the time while still incorporating melodies into the mix. Here's a listen. I also want to go on a brief sound design tangent because, to be honest, it is criminally overlooked by most people. Sound design is what can make even the simplest of actions satisfying to do. I mean, who do you think made things like the satisfying sounds of the pause screen or Arthur's Deadeye in Red Dead Redemption 2? Who do you think created the crisp and powerful sounds of Kratos' Leviathan axe? That's right, sound designers. So if you don't mind, I'm going to showcase a few of my favorite sound design pieces in Ghost of Tsushima.
There's two more out there.
It's sound design like this that makes the already satisfying combat even more so. I highly recommend y'all check out sound design videos of your favorite media if you can, because you'd be surprised how much effort goes into making things sound cool. Alright, now it's time to discuss the characters themselves. While there are plenty of side characters to discuss, I want to keep the flow of the video consistent. There's a great series of videos by Cycnic dissecting each of the main and bigger side characters. I'll put a link in the description so that you can check it out for yourself. So in this video, we'll just be focusing on the three most important characters in this story: Jin Sakai, Khotun Khan, and Lord Shimura. Jin Sakai is one of the most compelling protagonists I've ever seen in any PlayStation game, or even any game period. At the start of the game, it's established that Jin has a strong belief in the honorable ways of the Shogun. He is committed to facing his enemies head-on, honoring them with a fair fight and a warrior's death. That all changes, however, when he confronts the leader of the Mongols, Khotun Khan, to save Lord Shimura. Yet, he fails and is thrown off the bridge. He survives, but at that moment he questions if the honorable way of the samurai will be enough to stop the Mongols, as they have resorted to using every dirty trick in the book. Fortunately for him, he has a new ally in a thief named Yuna, who saves him from the battlefield after the samurai initially lost. In exchange for his help in rescuing her brother Taka, Yuna has suggested sneaking up on enemies and slitting their throats previously, but Jin refused because of his code. After his battle with the Khan, however, he has to make the hard choice to go against his code for the sake of saving the lives of some prisoners in a camp. It's interesting to see his mentality on using dishonorable war tactics evolve as the story progresses. At first, killing this way is seen only as a means to an end. He doesn't take any pleasure from killing his enemies in cold blood. Also, I forgot to talk about this in the initial script, but I feel like it's worth pointing out. Whenever you get the prompt to kill a wounded enemy on the ground, it says "end suffering" and not "finish off." This really shows that even though Jin has to do all these terrible things, he still sees the Mongols as human. Like, let me tell you, if this was God of War, or God forbid Mortal Kombat, finishing off the enemies would be shown in a super grotesque and over-the-top way. Look how deadly and dangerous Jin is. And not only would that be incredibly jarring for a game like this, but also it just wouldn't be in character for Jin to absolutely mutilate his victims. As the game goes on, however, he inadvertently gives the common people hope, with them calling Jin the Ghost. While he's hesitant about this new identity at first, when he realizes the hope he gives his people, he slowly starts to embrace it. Eventually, Jin gets to a point where he forgoes the honorable way of the samurai entirely by, in Lord Shimura's own words, spreading fear and chaos. This then causes tension between him and his uncle, as Jin starts to see him as someone willing to throw away his people's lives for the sake of fighting the Mongols honorably. After a while, it starts to make sense why common villagers were so quick to embrace Jin as the ghost. Hell, the reason that Ryuzo betrays Jin at all, despite being childhood friends, is that he doesn't want to be another casualty spent by Shimura. We'll get to Lord Shimura's point of view in a bit, but Jin, despite being influenced by Yuna at first, fully commits to the ghost persona during the second act. Two main points of the story reflect this. First, the death of, spoilers, Taka. Ryuzo set up an ambush for Jin, knocking him out. When he comes to, he sees himself and Taka tied up in the presence of Khotun Khan. The Khan tries to convince Jin to use the ghost to make the people of Tsushima submit to him. When Jin refuses, the Khan then tries to make Taka kill him in exchange for Taka's freedom. At this point, we know that Taka and Yuna have spent their entire lives running away from or being in danger. But Taka decides that he won't run away anymore. And, well...
Stop! Tell you that!
Your friend died for you. Now I must find another, and you must choose again.
Can I just say after that scene how amazing Jin's actor Daisuke Tsuji is in this game? The way the delivery of his lines evolves as Jin's character changes throughout the story is truly impeccable. He starts stoic and in control of his emotions, as Shimura taught him to be, but by the second act, he shows far more anger and sadness as his initial worldview starts to fall apart. I will forever be mad that he didn't win Best Performance at the Game Awards that year. I know, award shows are bullshit, but come on. Laura Bailey is a fantastic voice actress, there's no disputing that, but Daisuke Tsuji had so much more to prove with this game, since he was mostly a lesser-known actor for projects like Letters from Iwo Jima, The Man in the High Castle, and Love, Death, and Robots. Then again, after this game's success, he would go on to voice Thunder in Fortnite and motherfucking Scorpion in Mortal Kombat 1. So it's great to see his work hasn't gone unnoticed. Sorry, tangent over. The second moment is after seeing his uncle send a bunch of soldiers to be killed by an explosive cargo. Up until that moment, Jin had always tried to reason with others that Shimura always had his people's best interests at heart, even when others were telling him otherwise. But after seeing firsthand the lives Shimura is willing to sacrifice to win, his entire worldview becomes shattered. Everything he thought he knew about protecting his people starts to fall apart. This is why Jin proceeds to sneak into the Mongol stronghold and poison them all, which serves as the last straw for Lord Shimura, branding Jin a traitor to the shogun. In truth, the code of honor Lord Shimura follows has some resemblance to the Bushido, which was conceptualized around the time this game takes place, but wouldn't be fully established until a full century after this game takes place. So no, this code of honor isn't exactly accurate to the period, but its inclusion in this game is what makes the conflict work. Not to mention, the game makes it clear that this code comes from specifically Lord Shimura. When Shimura asks Jin what honor means to him, he says,
I guess protecting people. The ones who can't fight for themselves.
So in a way, Jin does remain loyal to his idea of honor, even if his uncle doesn't feel the same way. That might be his best quality and what makes him a great protagonist. He doesn't care if he has to be branded a traitor by the shogun, if it means his people will be free and hopeful. To paraphrase The Dark Knight, he's whatever Tsushima needs him to be. We'll get more into Lord Shimura's point of view soon enough, but it all makes for some engaging conflict that shows each side of honor has consequences, whether intentional or not. But with that said, There's a saying that a story is only as good as its villain, so let's talk about the main antagonist, Khotun Khan. Right in the opening scene, Khotun Khan shows us exactly the type of person and warrior he is. When told by a warrior named Adachi to fight him in an honorable battle, the Khan proceeds to toss meat on him, set him on fire, and slice his head off. Just that one moment should tell you that the Khan does not fight with honor whatsoever. He states to Lord Shimura that while the samurai were sharpening their swords, he learned everything about them, from their traditions, beliefs, and even war tactics. He knows every move the samurai will make before they do, and since the Khan knows Shimura will always fight his enemies head-on, with honor, their defeat is practically guaranteed to him. This is why the Khan spends most of his scenes bargaining with his enemies. He knows they can't break their code, so he tries to make them submit so that no more blood has to be spilled. To the Khan, it's not enough to simply kill the samurai. He needs to see them broken and defeated, unwilling to break their code, even if it means the entire island will die because of it. That, to the Khan, is the true victory. The saddest part about Khotun Khan wanting to divide and conquer is that he kind of does win in the end, at least with the dividing part. This battle strategy is what eventually leads to Jin having to break his code, which then causes tension between him and his uncle, and after Jin poisons the Mongol warriors inside of Castle Kaneda, Shimura outcasts Jin from his kingdom. The Khan then proceeds to use Jin's own poison against him, including poisoning other villages in the process. A great example of Jin's actions as the ghost having consequences. The Khan knows that Jin is becoming a legend as the ghost, and he tries multiple times to get Jin to make his people submit to him. This is what makes a great hero and villain dynamic. They have different ideals, but they have that one thing that connects them. In this case, both Jin and Khotun Khan are willing to do whatever it takes to win the war. Khotun Khan specifically also wants to make it out of the shadow of his grandfather, who happens to be the real-life Genghis Khan. I don't have too much else to say about him other than part of the reason he works so well is because of the performance by Patrick Gallagher. Everybody's performance in this game is incredible, but Patrick specifically plays the Khan as very condescending towards his enemies. Since nobody's willing to break their code, he treats every situation like all this bloodshed could have been spared if they had just surrendered. All of that makes for one effective antagonist and a great villain for a game like this. And now, it's time to talk about the one person who's arguably responsible for this whole game because he couldn't let go of his pride, Lord Shimura. Lord Shimura is a man bound by his code of honor to make his presence known to his enemy, strike them down, and give them a warrior's death. That, to Shimura, is the way of the samurai. He has spent most of Jin's childhood engraving it in his head that only cowards attack from the shadows. I've already gone over how samurai in the 13th century weren't bonded by this kind of code, but I prefer to see it in this context differently. Lord Shimura is representation of tradition and authority, and anyone who defies that authority shall be imprisoned or put to death. For the longest time, he and Jin saw eye to eye on pretty much everything. That is until Yuna shows up in the picture. To give some context, Yuna hails from Yarikawa, which before the game's events resisted Lord Shimura's forces. As such, Shimura immediately sees Yuna as untrustworthy, and later on, when he's at his limit with Jin's dishonorable actions, says,
You must blame her for this outrage.
This makes Jin doubling down on his persona as the ghost all the more heartbreaking. Jin isn't just losing a father figure here, Shimura is losing someone he considers a son. Jin this whole game has been inspiring the people of Tsushima to protect themselves, but Shimura only sees it as Jin teaching people to defy their superiors. Admittedly, I do see some similarities in Lord Shimura to Dutch Vanderlyn from Red Dead Redemption 2. Two people who pride themselves on being honorable and understanding, wanting to protect their families, but in reality only care about themselves, their image, and always being the one in control of everything. While Shimura isn't as actively manipulative as someone like Dutch, he is still shown to be willing to sacrifice his soldiers and arguably the whole island just so he can keep his hands clean. So, alright, case closed, right? Shimura is just a stubborn old man stuck in his ways. Well, it's really not that simple. Shimura's ends may not justify the means, but he truly does care about his people and his nephew. Shimura even wanted Jin to lead the clan once he died, so Jin going down the road of the ghost is the one thing he fears the most. If his only remaining family is branded a traitor by the shogun, what does that say about his clan, his family, his legacy? Yes, Shimura is stubborn and downright arrogant, but he still wants what's best for Jin. He's even willing to bend his code by hiring bandits or even throwing Yuna, a thief, under the bus, just so Jin doesn't have to lose the life he promised for so long. This is what makes the conflict between Jin and Shimura so effective. Shimura could break his code any day if he wanted to. But when all is said and done, he cares more about his loyalty to the shogun than the life of his nephew. All of this comes ahead in the final mission, The Tale of Lord Shimura. Jin and his uncle meet in the training grounds that we saw them train together in during Jin's childhood before heading to an arena divided by white and red leaves, the last of Clan Sakai and Clan Shimura. It's here that Shimura reveals that the shogun has ordered him to take Jin's head as punishment for his actions. For almost the entire game, Lord Shimura has had to keep his emotions in check, only cracking when he slaps Jin for being told that,
I sacrificed everything I knew to save our people. I gave them hope. You did nothing.
But it's at this moment, right here, where Shimura starts to crack as tears roll down his face. Everything that he had been building up for his family and their future, gone. These are two men divided because of their beliefs and the way they fight. As the two themselves put it,
You have no honor, and you are a slave to it.
I'm sure a lot of us have gone through a life similar to Jin's. As children, many of us were taught about how the world works and what is right and wrong by our parents or parental figures. We spend our entire lives believing things to be black and white, that good always prevails over evil, and that our parents won't let us down. But as we get older, and we take in more people's perspectives on the world and life, we slowly start to see the cracks in what our parents taught us. We realize that our parents don't have all the answers. For some, they realize that almost everything their parents taught them was either wrong or biased towards their point of view. Now, not every parent is like that, obviously, but sometimes, when we start to form our own beliefs and ideals, the ones who raised us will see it as us betraying them. The truth is, we're all just incredibly messed up people trying to make sense of the world we live in. And sometimes these views cause families and friends to fall out. Even if we love the other person, there are moments where the right thing to do is to leave them behind. If you were to ask me what Ghost of Tsushima is really about, I would tell you it's about family and how things like honor can destroy relationships with the ones we love. Shimura was too afraid of breaking his code to realize what had to be done to save his people and his family. Yuna wanted to give her and Taka a new life, one where they wouldn't have to fight for survival every day. Yet, Lord Shimura believed that taking back Castle Kaneda was more important than protecting the lives of two siblings who would die for each other. Then there are the other side characters I haven't mentioned until now. Sensei Ishikawa chose to uphold his honor over caring for his daughter figure Tomoe, which caused her to use his teachings against him. Lady Masako lost her entire family to a rising clan, and thus let go of her honor as she had nothing left to lose anymore. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes this vague, superficial idea of being an honorable person can get in the way of the truly important things. Sometimes, to protect the people we care about, we must do the wrong things for the right reasons. Yet those wrong things we do will sometimes divide us from the very people we're trying to protect, or even cause severe consequences that may put other people in danger. But in the end, we all do what we must for what we believe is right. This is why superhero characters like Spider-Man and Batman stick with us for so long. Are we arguably putting people in danger by fighting the ones trying to hurt them? Maybe. Maybe not. We just do what we have to so that they can be safe. After Jin writes the last words of Clan Sakai, he and Shimura have one last duel to decide their fates. Eventually, Jin proves triumphant, and Shimura's last request is to honor him with a warrior's death. This leaves you with two different choices: either honor his request and kill him, or let him walk away. While I don't think either of the endings is specifically the canonical one, I chose to let him walk away. This ending shows that even though Jin has no honor, he won't kill his family. This whole final scene reminds me of the ending of The Dark Knight. Jin doesn't care if he's outcasted or hated. If it means that his people are safe from the Mongol invasion, he can live with that. Regardless of what ending you choose, Jin fully accepts his role as the Ghost, thus ending the Sakai clan and bringing about a new era for the island of Tsushima. And that is Ghost of Tsushima. You can argue that it doesn't do anything new or revolutionary as an action-adventure game, and I agree with you to an extent. Games like Assassin's Creed have existed for years before this game. What makes this game a masterpiece to me is that although it's standard on the surface, everything was done with so much love, detail, and polish that it makes the game truly incredible. It's absolutely my game of the year for 2020, and I'm really glad that others feel the same way. To Nate Fox and the rest of the development team, I just want to say thanks. Thank you for showing your love of samurai culture and film in a way that makes this game one for the ages. Until then, my name is Aaron the Wolf, and I'll see you all next time. Stay strong and live life.